Well, hello everyone. Many of you have been calling for a podcast of sorts, and I've actually thought of doing an interview series where I talk to various interesting people. My first subject is a British woman who was raped by a migrant. Now, since she was a progressive at the time, it seriously altered her political beliefs. One might even say that she was red-pilled. Now that might sound tasteless, but as the black people say, it is what it is. Thanks to the cult of political correctness, it now seems that our morality as a culture has been altered for the worse. Now it appears that racism is worse than rape. I've made videos about this before, like the case with the gang rape on Gotland, where a woman in a wheelchair was assaulted, and instead of merely protesting the rape itself, left-wingers and feminists had to protest racism. Indirectly, this is a statement on morality. Racism is worse than rape. Even though racism is merely a thought, whereas rape is a traumatizing action. In the UK, where our victim is from, child molesters are given longer sentences if they rape non-white children, because according to the judge, non-white sex abuse victims suffer more than white ones. Political correctness thus leads to dehumanization, and it also serves to confuse the victims. I mentioned before how here in Sweden, one victim didn't want to report her crime at first because she didn't want the poor refugee to be deported. And another victim who was passed out during the rape didn't even believe the police when they were called to the scene. She dismissed the rape accusation as racism, simply blowing the witnesses off as racists. But then she saw the video evidence that bystanders had recorded and changed her mind. Is this what it takes? Has political correctness created a social climate where non-white perpetrators are given a social license to operate merely by the virtue of their skin color? If so, perhaps anti-racism is worse than racism. The woman we are about to interview has experienced all of that and then some, including a desire to convert to Islam after the rape. So we're gonna get into all of that. Relevant questions I would like the audience to ponder here is: what kind of a social climate is the left creating? And what is the media's responsibility here? Because political correctness has gone so far that rape victims are now afraid of being called racist merely for sharing their experiences. And this forces us to reconsider the idea that political correctness is harmless. Enjoy the interview. So, even as a rape victim, you're afraid of being fired for racism or facing other types of consequences. And I totally understand that. This actually isn't the first time I've come across a victim with exactly those types of concerns, which is why I felt it's important to give you a voice. I think that the number of women who stay silent about their abuse because they're afraid of being called racist is a lot higher than people would imagine. And your story almost brought me to tears, because not only is rape terrible enough on its own, but you actually got raped right before you needed to have important brain surgery, which is a delicate situation and certainly contributed to the trauma from what I understood. So I'll let you get into that, but first, would you tell us what happened?
I didn't know him. He was a complete stranger to me, and he had been following me, and he was grabbing at my arm. And the police had actually driven past as he was grabbing. So I had waved to the police to let them know, that I was in trouble. But they didn't stop, they continued.
Did they see you though? Did they look at?
I can't remember now because it was quite some time ago. But yeah, they were on the road and I was walking, I was on the pathway trying to push him away.
Right, they should have noticed.
Yeah, and I I had hoped that they would stop so that he would leave, but they didn't stop. And I was walking on my own, and I was asking him where he lived. Can he go home and find his way home so that he could leave me alone, basically. And he did appear to be walking in the opposite direction, but he must have stopped and watched me from behind a wall to see which house that I went into. And then I heard a knocking at my door when I'd arrived at home, and I didn't expect it to be this man, but he was at the door, and as I opened the door, he stuck his foot through the crack in the door and forced his way into my home. And then it was the living room, and he pushed his way into my living room. And then what happened.
Yeah, you said that this was before you needed to have important brain surgery.
Yeah.
So how did that contribute to making it worse?
I wouldn't have been able to have this surgery if I had reported it to the police then and there. They would have had to. The problem with the surgery is that you have to go through a lot of psychology tests and lots of psychiatry tests to make sure that you would recover in an appropriate manner after such a traumatic surgery. So that would have meant that the whole surgery had to be delayed for at least 18 months. And I wasn't in a position whereby I could delay by 18 months. It had to be done then and there. And that's something that the police asked as well, why I had delayed and not reported it. And it's just not possible when you have that kind of necessary surgery.
Right. In your video you said that you basically had to learn basic things all over again, like talking.
Not necessarily talking, but walking, using cutlery, walking down the stairs. I still have problem with heights and movement, but I'm recovering from that pretty well.
Did you have anyone looking after you when you were recovering and such? Because the whole thing, it seems like a lot to have to go through on your own.
Yeah, well, I'm actually a single mother, so I had the brain surgery because I was having so many seizures after pregnancy, which was the planned pregnancy, and they had basically recorded me to be in a constant seizure, so it was really necessary that I had this surgery so as my little boy was safe. And he was 18 months at the time, so he lived with his dad for 3 months, which is great because his dad potty trained him. And then I lived at home with my parents as I recovered. And both me and my son, we were both learning to use cutlery and walking together. And it sounds heartbreaking, but it was quite good fun because there's a lot of races and a lot of falling over between the two of us. So.
Okay. In your video you said that the rapist was harassing you afterwards. He was knocking on your door every day. For how long?
Well, the surgery was the following week, so it was literally it was for 7 days basically that he was, or 4 days that I was at home. He was knocking on my door. Yeah. And luckily my son wasn't with me because he had already gone to live with his dad for that period of time during the surgery.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
You said that you felt guilty and almost felt sorry for your rapist because of culture. Do you want to elaborate on this?
Well, I think that the mainstream media, they kind of force this issue onto us. And they claim that these migrants are fleeing from some kind of war zone, and you don't know as a victim what kind of problems they've been through. And I think that there's this sort of guilt inflicted onto all of us in society, not just the victims but everybody, and that's why all these migrants are coming over, because we're made to feel guilty, such as that, the picture of that little boy in Turkey who had died and drowned.
Yeah.
So we're all kind of made to feel guilty, and that's, brought into our own personal traumas, which we're dealing with. And then from a more personal perspective, there are cases in the UK where children in schools have been arrested for what is perceived as racism. They may have just asked if they can change groups from a non-English speaking Asian group to an English speaking group, and that's been perceived as racism.
And when you say Asian, you mean Pakistani or Afghan or like Indian, not Not like Chinese people.
No. No. Yeah, Indian and Pakistani, and they seem to be getting arrested for just asking simple questions. So from a personal perspective, you have to decide after such a trauma like that, can you risk being arrested? Are you in a position to be possibly arrested for perceived racism?
Yeah, for even accusing someone could be perceived as racism.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So I, as a mother, I felt that I couldn't deal with the trauma of possibly being arrested and dealing with the trauma of a rape as well. So I chose my mental health over reporting it at that point.
Yeah. But it sounds weird at first that one would almost feel sorry for the rapist because you think of them as an immigrant, they're from a different culture, it's just a culture clash.
Yeah.
But you really were more of an social justice warrior before this happened, would you say? You were more leftist and feminist and tolerant and, oh yay, diversity, all that stuff. So that certainly played into how you reacted and in the sense of feeling sorry for the rapist, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's been built into, for the most part of us, through the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And if people aren't necessarily, watching the mainstream media, it's still forced upon friends and family. And if they're quite radical on the left side, then it's still going to have an impact on those who aren't necessarily, following the news and what have you.
So in another way, political correctness basically enables rape and silences its victims.
Yes.
Which is what I've been saying in my videos for a very long time.
Yeah.
And also another thing I found interesting about your video is that there was another video where you said that your rapist wanted to cuddle afterwards, and how this was extremely weird to you, which it is. But when I heard about it, it wasn't very weird to me because I've heard about this before. There's this white Swedish serial rapist called Hagamannen here in Sweden, who is infamous for his brutal crimes. He would attack random women outdoors and even tried killing several of them. And I was watching this documentary about him where they interviewed one of his victims. And she was attacked and punched in the face, and when she's lying there on the grass being raped, she suddenly had this epiphany, and she told him that it's cold and uncomfortable and asked him if they can't go inside to her place instead and continue having sex there. And this was just a type of like defense mechanism. As soon as they came inside the apartment building, she rings her neighbor's doorbell for help, at which point the rapist ran away. Now, what I found fascinating is that this guy actually bought it. Like, he seriously believed he had managed to charm her, and it makes me think of this clinical psychologist, Nicholas Groff, who did research on rapists, and he devised a typology summing up 4 different types of profiles. And the second category is a power rapist, and this is what he had to say. It's on Wikipedia here. They may believe that even though the victim initially resists them, that once they overpower their victim, the victim will eventually enjoy the rape. The rapist needs to believe that the victim enjoyed what was done to them, and they may even ask the victim to meet them for a date later. Because this is only a fantasy, the rapist does not feel reassured for long by either their own performance or the victim's response. The rapist feels that they must find another victim, convinced that this victim will be the right one. So basically there's rapists who think that they're living in some fucked up romantic comedy, or an episode of How I Met Your Mother, where I have to find the one. And it wouldn't surprise me if rapists have favorite movies such as When Harry Met Sally, Titanic, Bridget Jones's Diary, 500 Days of Summer, 17 Again, featuring Zac Efron. And sorry for blabbering so much, but I think the biggest mistake people make when it comes to rape and its perpetrators is to apply a normal human perspective on what's going on. Because if you're not a rapist, you can't possibly know what a rapist thinks like. So you shouldn't even be trying to apply your own non-rapist logic on this extraordinary brutal crime. And this is most obvious to me when it comes to the tiresome what were you wearing question. Like the little research that's been done on the subject found that rapists choose victims according to personality, body language, not clothing. They're concerned primarily with how easy they can bully someone into submission, how easy they can get away with it. So nice girls that might have like a hard time asserting themselves are probably going to find themselves in the danger zone more, if that makes sense. And the reason I brought this up is because I saw a comment on your video that was insanely mean and retarded, and I thought we should read it so people can get an idea of like the type of feedback you've got. I mean, you've gotten a lot of support, but there's also been some really mean fuckers. So there's this guy, and he said, I just have to take a chug before I read this shit. I really can't understand you or certain other rape victims. This scumbag fucking raped you and you still have empathy for this guy. Why weren't you repulsed? Why didn't you resist more when this pig forced his way into your house to rape you? Why did you allow your rapist to cuddle you after he raped you? This gives such a strong impression of females having no own will and don't really care about being raped. Are you aware of those signals? How come somebody had to tell you that you got raped? A rape is a fucking rape. Now combine that with the daily hatred for white men and the collective silence of females with things like Rotterdam, and you know why white guys are fucking pissed about their women. It's really hard to understand you and your behavior. And it seems to me like this guy has the same mentality as the rapist, because he's talking about owning white women and basically giving reasons to all of the things that you did wrong, but none of the things that the rapist did wrong. And it's insane how some men will listen to a victim and find a way to make it all about themselves, right?
Right.
What do you say to people like that? Where do you even begin?
Well, yeah, I mean, as a victim at that point, it's very confusing because you're in a situation where you're a victim of rape and you're being cuddled, and I think a lot of people have this idea of the Hollywood rape. And because they have that mentality as this is how it will work, then that's what their expectation is. And of course, you don't see in a Hollywood rape, in a Hollywood movie, that the rapist is cuddling his victim afterwards. So it's all good and well having this perceived idea of how you will, how you would deal with such a situation. But I don't understand that mentality either, and I think that it's one of the off-putting things, but I think that women who want to speak about this will have such difficulty speaking about it in the future.
Yeah, because like you're not comforting him because you actually feel sorry. You're doing it because you're fucking scared shitless of this completely unhinged psycho that goes from one extreme to the other, and you really just want to get out of life.
Exactly, yeah. And, I have a little boy as well, and I want to stay alive so as to bring him up. So, it's all good and well.
I completely understand. I don't think it's weird at all. And another thing people don't realize is it can take a very long time to come to terms with the fact that you were raped, because nobody wants to think of themselves as a rape victim. So it might take a really long time before they can actually admit that it really happened to them. Like, think of guys who don't want to admit it because it's emasculating. For girls, it's just dehumanizing. It took you a year to come out with it, right?
Yeah, it took me a year to recollect because also I was struggling with the aftermath of the brain surgery as well. But it took a year, and then it took a few months for me to find the courage to report it as well.
To the police, and your case is still pending, right?
Yes, it is, yes. Yeah.
What kind of reactions did you get from your family and friends when you told them about this? I'm assuming you told them.
Yeah, I told my friends first, and I had expected too much. I had expected some understanding, and we, friendships continued. But with the female friends, they had left me in a unknown city, knowing that I'd been raped by a stranger, and they left me in this city knowing that I'd been raped by this stranger, and also knowing that we were meant to stick together. So they were acting with malice, and for some reason they were very angry with what I had to say, what had happened to me. And with another friend, a male friend who was Indian, he seemed to stop talking to me as well because he was dealing with racism or something. So I think that he found that my situation was too much for him to deal with. And then also my family. One of my family members has, threatened to report me to the police just for speaking on a politically conservative side. That they are quite radical left.
Well, wait. They wanted to report you to the police because you told them about what happened to you, or?
No. This was I told them about what had happened, and because they are quite radical left, then they obviously took offence to what I had told them as well. I think that a lot of people are taking offence to what I'm telling them, because what I'm telling them is a politically incorrect crime. If it was a politically correct crime, it would have been done by a white man, wouldn't it? And
so you got no support from anyone you know in real life, basically?
No, which is why I've turned to the internet.
Wow, and you told me, I mean, we talked before on private conversation, just for transparency. You told me that you're new to the internet, right? You're not used to using YouTube and social media, right?
Yes.
So what kind of reactions did you get from the internet? Because you told me the alt-right was despicable to you. So talk a bit more about that.
Okay, well, the left were how I expected. They were calling me a Nazi, a bigot, a racist, a xenophobe, and a snowflake, they called me. And the alt-right, yeah, a snowflake, because you're meant to be brave when you go through this sort of thing. And then the alt-right, I think the problem that I had with the alt-right is that I had used like your videos and other videos on YouTube in order to try to come to terms with the fact that I was angry with what had happened to me and angry with all this multiculturalism, and I suppose I had expected that people would be angry with the government as well and be angry with the multiculturalism as well. And it seems that, well, on YouTube at least, it seems that people were angry with me for what had happened to me, and possibly, it was because they assumed that I had voted to bring these people in. So they said, you've likely voted for it, so you deserve it. I'm sorry,
it's amazing how they will say shit like that while at the same time claiming to be better than the Muslim invaders. I mean, it seems to me like they're equally misogynistic. And I did a video on this. I know I have experience of this myself, not as a victim, but I did a video on this really rapey YouTube prank and how problematic I felt it was. And it was a black guy pranking his mixed race, white appearing girlfriend. And a ton of the comments were saying the same things that they told you, that women who sleep with black men deserve to be raped. So I'm assuming that women who vote left deserve to be raped as well. I've seen a lot of comments like that on Nationalist Circle. So it's not a rare sentiment in that group. And I mean, I bet the only reason alt-right aren't out raping women is because those guys never leave their mother's basement long enough. They probably got their mother's corpse lying around just so they can beat that shit up whenever they feel like it, get mommy's approval. Right?
Another technique, bioenergetics, designed to help clients release memories stored in the muscles, in this case by hitting a pillow with a tennis racket.
I was angry at my mother. Okay. So I started saying, Mom! 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 Why did you do that to me?
I mean, the way they're acting is so counterproductive because it's obviously going to discourage women from sharing their experiences of multiculturalism. So women who've been raped by immigrants now both have to worry about the left and the Nazis giving them shit, each for different reasons. The other one is that you're a racist, and the first one is that you weren't racist enough. So you just can't win in the game of identity politics. But you did get some support from the alt-right too, right? I seem to recall you saying that Millennial Woes shared your video and stuff.
Yes. There's been a lot of support on Twitter, through the alt-right on Twitter, and Millennial Woes and Pat Condell as well. So there has been a lot of support for what I've been speaking about as well. Yeah.
Have you gotten more support than hate, would you say, online?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's good. That's good. It's a thing with. Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
I was going to say, I think that my expectations, because I had seen these videos and because I had sort of taken comfort in these videos myself, there was this expectation on my part, perhaps, that people would be angry with me, with society rather than me. But yeah.
That would be a logical response, but the thing about the internet is that it really brings out the worst in people. So you just, no matter what you say, there's gonna be like at least 10 assholes to shit on it, no matter what you say. So that's a tip when it comes to browsing the internet is don't take people too seriously.
Yeah.
Because they would never say this shit in real life, but they will say it, on the web.
Yeah.
But what, I mean, you used to be left-wing feminist, correct?
Not a feminist, no, but I was more left-wing voter, yeah.
So what's your political leaning now, given your experiences?
Well, I've never actually had any political loyalty. I just voted anyone left-wing based on their manifestos. And I suppose because I've always voted against war, because my feeling is that if we have war, then there'll be, civilians killed, unnecessarily killed, and also displacement, which means that the Europeans will have to house those who are displaced. So my feeling is that I'll have to vote for a small party again, and with coalitions happening more frequently in the UK, then I expect that I will be voting for far-right parties in the future. Just because it won't be desirable for the main parties to provide a coalition with. So.
Yeah, you told me that as a former SJW-ish, it took this terrible assault to kind of wake you up, right?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty grisly sentiment to me, because it basically confirms a pretty nasty thought I've been playing around with in my head for a while, which is that this is something I've noticed about Sweden, really. That before the migrant crisis, immigration was largely concentrated to specific areas. After the migrant crisis, the left party pushed for a change where, due to lack of room and lack of housing, suddenly every town in Sweden, every city, every neighborhood became forced to accept migrants. Before it was more optional, but now it wasn't anymore. And what that led to, essentially, is a huge spread of sexual assault and assault rape all over the country. Now every city in Sweden became forced to experience the cultural misogyny of migrants from that part of the world. Even my town, which used to be pretty protected against the effects of mass immigration, suddenly experienced migrant assault rape in a typical vein that you read about in the media, like girls being chased outside and so on and so on. And I noticed how opinions started changing all over the country. Like, I would seriously see news articles with leftist, anti-racist activists who used to be pro-immigration and pro-diversity suddenly change their mind and get scared when migrants started living close to their children. So they weren't abused themselves, but just being around migrants made them freak out. There was this one woman who had a riding school with horses, and she shut it down when an asylum center opened up right next to her. And it just became clear to me that it's so easy to be tolerant when you're a white person living in a white neighborhood, because then there's nothing to tolerate. you don't actually have to experience the cultures that you usually welcome at a distance. And it's so absurd to me to see all these people who voted for pro-immigration parties, both the right and the left in Sweden are pro-mass immigration. They suddenly have the nerve to object to immigrants moving into their neighborhoods. So it was fine with immigration so long as it didn't have to occur in their own neighborhood. They were happy piling that shit onto the rest of us for decades, but when it comes to their own town, they get really nervous. So, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've noticed that the Hollywood elite and, you know, the political elite, they all have, and even, you know, you hear of J.K. Rowling and Lily Allen here in the UK.
George
you know,
Clooney.
they're apologists for the entire UK, and you know, they're inviting these migrants over, but no one's, they're not willing to house them themselves. I mean, where I was living next to several men who were sharing a small 2-bedroomed house the same size as myself. So these men are packed into these houses, and you know, you wouldn't see J.K. Rowling house several men in a bedroom of her mansion. You just wouldn't see that, and I'm very lucky now because I've moved from that multicultural area to a very white area. So I too am prone to forgetting just how awful it is in that horrible situation, very hostile situation with these migrants. It's so scary being in that situation, surrounded by all these men living together. It's a weird situation which they put themselves in, and it's a horrible situation being the only white in the area of that kind of nature.
Yeah, it's definitely weird being a minority, and that's something that white people are still the majority, still. Might not always be that way, but as for the time being, we are. And it's, I mean, most people who promote this multiculturalism, mass immigration, they don't have the experience of being a minority. No. They don't have that. And they don't have the experience of the cultures that they are condoning. So it's very easy to be tolerant when you don't actually have to live by it or experience what you're promoting. So it makes sense to me. It's not weird to me that you would vote for the anti-immigration party, considering what you've experienced and considering how your environment has reacted. It's pretty scary, actually. And I think that a lot of women have similar experiences. I've been contacted by women who told me that even the migrants molesting them had the nerve to call them racist because the women didn't want to be molested. So that's interesting because it's like kind of like Donald Trump said when Mexico are sending their people, they're not sending the best. It's the same with Europe because in these countries, they get told by the human smugglers that Sweden is this paradise where you get a free house and a free car and 10,000 crowns a month, and there's tons of willing women, and like the culture clash is crazy because in their own countries, like for instance, I read this article, a really fascinating article about how moving from Iraq to Finland, I think it was, and this guy said that there was a huge difference because in that home country, if a woman looks at you, that means she wants to have sex.
Right, yeah.
Like we have these incidents here in Sweden where non-white, non-European immigrants are following women on the street. Like I've heard about creepy stories like that. And it's because they genuinely believe they've been given a signal just because a woman was like just gave them a peek. It's perverse. It's perverse that this is what when you claim that all cultures are equal, this is what you get. You get these insane misunderstandings, which, well, they're not always misunderstandings. I mean, in your case, you thought it was a cultural misunderstanding, but it was pretty clear that the guy knew what he was doing.
Yeah, intent,
Yeah. Although I still, it wouldn't surprise me if his culture kind of validates it.
Well, that's one of the things which I was thinking about, because his cuddle afterwards, sometimes, I mean, I don't know much about the cultures, but sometimes I wonder if a rape victim automatically is married to the rapist in some of these cultures. I don't know whether that's the case. And if that is, then that would explain why some of these weird cuddling going on. And
I honestly, that makes sense to me. I'm sure there's this psychological profile for it too, but,
yeah,
from a cultural point of view, it does make sense. I mean, some of these Muslim cultures are very weird like that.
Yeah.
It's like, I attacked you, so we're married now.
yeah,
That's the way it works in his country. So, like, he moved here and nobody told him otherwise. So I even saw this fucking this video by, I think it was AJ, that media. They interviewed women in some Muslim country that basically were saying that it makes sense for men to beat their wives. They were smiling and talking about it and saying that, well, we need to be put in place sometime. So if that's the attitudes going around in that society, it's like, of course open borders isn't going to work. Because you have one set of people. I mean, open borders would work if it only applied to European countries. It's not going to work when it applies to the whole world, since European nations have more in common. Another thing I found really interesting is that in one of your later videos, you said that you almost converted to Islam after the rape as a form of self-defense. Do you want to explain that phenomenon there?
Yeah, so being surrounded by these men, I felt that I needed to adapt to their culture so as I wouldn't get raped again. So to cover myself up and, and I'm pretty conservative in my dress code anyway, but to cover up my hair, because apparently that's even a sign of, I don't know. But I felt that I had to change the way that I dressed for their culture. And then I realised that I'd have to read the Quran, and much for me, and I chose to get fat instead. And
oh, really? You try to make yourself more unattractive, so...
Repulsive to the men surrounding me. So I chose to deliberately overeat and put on weight instead, yeah.
That's very sad and very common, actually. Very common. Some people develop anorexia after rape because it becomes a way to take back control over your body. So there's many different weird ways to deal with rape that still make sense in their own logic. That's actually not the first time I heard that. I've been contacted by women who said that when they lived in these immigrant ghettos in Sweden, it wasn't uncommon for Swedish girls to put on a hijab just to avoid being harassed.
Yes.
And I actually had a friend who lived in a ghetto in Stockholm. And she dated an Arab man for 13 years. So she knows a bit of Arab, but she's white. So when she was walking outside, immigrant guys would come up to her and be like, hey, why don't you come to a party? And if she told them off in Swedish, they would call her a fucking whore. But if she replied in Arab and said that they were bad Muslims for trying shit with her, they would respect her.
Right,
so
okay.
I think what we're seeing here across Europe with all these rapes is a new form of hate crime. Basically, you see white, non-Muslim women, they're worth less, according to these men, because of their culture, because of the role that religion plays in their culture. And it leads, unfortunately, to horrible incidents such as yours. That's disgusting, but it's really important to speak out, so thank you for speaking out about this. More women need to do this, regardless of what skin color or profession or social status their perpetrator has. I wish you good luck with your trial, and I urge people to subscribe to your channel for updates, because you make a lot of videos. They're very interesting. And you're going to be making more videos in the future, I assume.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. And thank you for allowing me to speak on your platform.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.